Grogu is often framed as the next Yoda because of his species, but the narrative does not treat him as a successor to Yoda's philosophy or discipline. Yoda represents centuries of training, emotional regulation, and deliberate restraint. Grogu represents raw instinct and emotional reaction, operating entirely from feeling rather than structure. Where Yoda embodies clarity, Grogu embodies uncertainty. The story shows Grogu as a child with overwhelming power, rather than a future teacher or leader. The narrative does not present him as someone guiding others or offering wisdom. Instead, we see him experiment with the Force like a reflex. He lifts objects when scared and pushes threats away, without calculating results. That lack of intention aligns him with characters driven by impulse, particularly Anakin. Grogu and Anakin share the same starting point. They were taken from their homes and placed into a system that treated them as assets. Anakin was pulled from Tatooine, leaving behind the only connection he ever knew. Grogu was taken from the Jedi Temple during a violent upheaval that separated him from any form of comfort or familiarity. Both gain power at the cost of stability. Neither character is shaped by training. Their abilities emerge through instinct long before they understand the Force as a system. Anakin destroys a control ship without knowing what he is doing, acting purely on reaction. Grogu stops a charging monster or calms a rancor through emotional intensity. Their power is natural, but their lack of control creates vulnerability rather than strength. Their relationships define their identities. Anakin's emotional center was Padme. Grogu's emotional center is Din Djarin. These bonds are not side elements of their story. They are the narrative purpose. The writers do not frame connection as a distraction. They frame connection as motivation, an anchor that gives each character direction. Both Anakin and Grogu gravitate toward attachment because attachment gives them belonging. The Jedi Order views attachment as a path to fear and control, but characters like Anakin and Grogu interpret attachment as a path to identity. Without those emotional bonds, neither character knows who they are. The Order fears loss. Grogu and Anakin fear isolation. The Jedi respond to both characters by tightening rules instead of adapting. Anakin is told to suppress emotion. Grogu is given the ultimatum to abandon attachment. In both cases, the Order applies a rigid system to individuals who do not fit that structure. The result is predictable: resistance, confusion, and the desire to escape those constraints. Luke recreates the same institutional logic that failed Anakin. During Grogu's training, Luke emphasizes detachment and discipline rather than connection and individuality. Grogu is given a symbolic choice between the lightsaber and a life with Din. The narrative frames this as a test, but structurally it reveals that the Jedi system repeats patterns without learning from past outcomes. Grogu reacts to the world with emotion, not strategy. When Din is in danger, Grogu intervenes without considering consequences. His choices stem from loyalty, not instruction. That emotional first approach mirrors Anakin's, where impulse precedes logic. Both characters treat power as protection for those they care about, rather than as a tool for ideological missions. The Jedi fail to understand that Grogu's emotional responses are not flaws. They are expressions of identity. The Order sees instability. Grogu sees connection. This disconnect exposes a structural weakness in the Jedi system itself. It functions only for those who match its expectations, not for those who challenge its assumptions. Grogu does not act out of selfishness. He acts out of attachment. Rather than wanting control, he wants belonging. The Force responds to intention, not to rules, and Grogu's intentions are consistently protective. His power mirrors Anakin's not because they are dangerous, but because they are emotionally driven. The more the Order pushes emotional detachment, the more Grogu gravitates toward freedom. His refusal to adopt a lifestyle of discipline reflects the reality that a rigid institution cannot train someone who values relationships over achievement. Anakin broke the system from within. Grogu leaves before the system can break him. Grogu's story exposes the limitations of the Jedi doctrine. He does not reject the Force. He rejects the idea that the Force requires isolation. That distinction matters. Institution and power are separate concepts. Grogu wants the latter but not the former, and that challenges the foundation of every Jedi rule. The narrative never positions Grogu as a successor to Yoda. It positions him as a reflection of what the Jedi could never accommodate. Grogu mirrors Anakin because both prove that power shaped by emotion does not fit within the Jedi structure. He is not the next Yoda. He is the lesson the Jedi still refuse to learn. Grogu represents a pathway separate from Jedi tradition. Yoda embodies centuries of structured doctrine, where power and identity are shaped by the Order's definition of discipline. Grogu, by contrast, interacts with the Force from instinct rather than instruction. Instead of memorizing procedure or philosophy, he explores what the Force means through experience. This makes him the first major Force user in Star Wars whose growth does not depend on permission from an institution or validation from a master. The Jedi and the Sith treat Force users as assets within ideological systems. Jedi train to serve the Republic and suppress individual identity, while Sith train to dominate and control. Grogu falls into neither category. His growth is internal rather than institutional. The narrative shows him learning through personal discovery, not through formal lessons. His relationship with the Force is reflective, emotional, and autonomous, which challenges the idea that power must be supervised to be legitimate. Grogu makes choices Anakin and Luke never got to make. Anakin was pushed into prophecy. Luke was pressured into legacy. Grogu, when given a fork in the road between identity and destiny, chooses identity. He rejects a structured life on the temple world and physically returns to Din, signaling that connection defines his path more than accomplishment. This narrative shift reflects a significant departure from the generational burden that defined previous heroes. His attachment to Din Djarin is not treated as an obstacle. Instead, it is the foundation of his growth. The Jedi believed attachment created fear of loss and led to corruption. For Grogu, attachment creates emotional balance. He intervenes to protect Din, not to control events. These actions are grounded in care, not instability. The series frames emotional connection as stabilizing rather than dangerous. Grogu is the first Force user whose emotional development is prioritized before his skill development. When he chooses to stay with Din, the story communicates that emotional maturity is a prerequisite for responsibility. Instead of teaching him to wield power first and manage emotion later, the path that broke Anakin, the narrative reverses the order. Grogu learns emotional foundation before technique. He is shaped as a person before he is shaped as a Force user. His lack of training is intentional, not a limitation. Jedi teaching methods attempt to standardize individuals into a single model of control. Grogu challenges that standardization. His actions show that the Force responds to intention more than repetition. He calms violent creatures, forms bonds, and makes intuitive decisions without needing instruction. The narrative suggests that the Force can be accessed naturally without doctrinal oversight. Grogu exposes flaws in the Jedi's definition of balance. The Jedi believe balance is achieved through detachment and neutrality. Grogu demonstrates balance through connection. His use of the Force is guided by emotional clarity. He acts to protect, not to dominate. This challenges one of the oldest assumptions in the franchise, that clarity comes from suppressing emotion rather than acknowledging it. Grogu's independence reveals a critical truth. The Force is not an institution. It is a relationship between an individual and the world around them. When Luke attempts to teach Grogu the Jedi way, the show reveals that institutional rigidity cannot support someone who values relationships more than titles. Grogu's refusal to adapt to the Jedi system proves that the Order is not universally applicable. He reframes how Star Wars portrays destiny. Anakin was expected to fulfill prophecy. Luke was expected to restore the Jedi. Grogu is expected to decide nothing. And that freedom becomes the point. His story removes the pressure of obligation and reframes destiny as self-determination. Star Wars stops treating the Force as a burden and starts treating it as a choice. Grogu introduces a new model of mentorship. Din teaches through example, not doctrine. There are no powers granted, no rules enforced, and no identity imposed. Din offers protection, belonging, and partnership. These qualities reinforce Grogu's confidence and autonomy, showing that guidance does not require control. Their bond proves that mutual respect can replace hierarchy. Grogu adds a new philosophical angle to the Force, that power can coexist with vulnerability. Yoda represents mastery. Vader represents domination. Grogu represents curiosity. His story examines the Force not as something to wield over others, but as something that reveals who a person is internally. It shows that emotional honesty can exist without corruption. His future potential broadens what Star Wars can explore. If Grogu becomes a Force user who never belonged to a Jedi temple, never studied ancient texts and never internalized doctrine, then his relationship to power will be different from any prior character. He may create a new philosophy, one defined by the individual, not by a council. A Force user with freedom becomes a new narrative archetype. Grogu's decision to reject Jedi training is not rebellion. It is a rejection of binary thinking. Jedi or Sith, detachment or obsession, rules or chaos. He chooses balance on his own terms. If he becomes powerful later, his power will originate from internal stability rather than obedience to tradition. That makes him immune to the ideological extremes that defined all previous Force users. Grogu is not the next Yoda because he represents something the Star Wars universe has never seen. A Force user whose identity is not controlled by destiny, not shaped by prophecy, and not limited by doctrine. He is the end of the old pattern and the beginning of something new, a future where power and emotion coexist without tragedy.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.